The Sprinkled Blood, a poem by Anonymous. The sprinkled blood is speaking before the Father's throne. The Spirit's power is seeking to make its virtues known. The sprinkled blood is telling Jehovah's love to man, while heavenly harps are swelling sweet notes to mercy's plan. The sprinkled blood is speaking forgiveness full and free. Its wondrous power is breaking each bond of guilt for me. The sprinkled blood's revealing a Father's smiling face. The Savior's love is sealing each monument of grace. The sprinkled blood is pleading its virtue as my own, and there my soul is reading her title to thy throne. The sprinkled blood is owning the weak one's feeblest plea. Mid sighs and tears and groaning, it pleads, O Lord, with thee. The Cross and its Shadow by Stephen N. Haskell, narrated by Timothy Turner. Chapter 28. The Feast of Trumpets. The trumpet was not only used as a musical instrument among the ancient Israelites, but it also filled an important place in their religious and civil ceremonies. It was associated with the entire life of the children of Israel. It was used on their joyful days and on their solemn days, and at the beginning of every month it was sounded over their burnt offerings and their peace offerings. It was to be a reminder to the Israelites of the Lord their God. In obedience to the command of God, Moses made 2 silver trumpets to be used in calling their assemblies and in regulating the journeyings of the children of Israel. When the priests blew both the trumpets, all the people were to assemble at the door of the tabernacle. If one trumpet sounded, only the princes responded. The call for summoning to the religious assemblies was different from the sound of an alarm, which was blown to gather the army for war. God promised that when they blew the alarm for war, they should be remembered before the Lord, and should be saved from their enemies. In the time of Solomon, great skill was shown in the blowing of the trumpets, so that the notes from 120 trumpets came forth as one sound. When God wished to gather the hosts of Israel at the base of Mount Sinai to listen to the proclamation of his holy law, from the midst of the glory of the Lord that covered the mountain, the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud was heard, and the people trembled, and as the voice of the trumpet sounded long, and waxed louder and louder, even Moses, that holy man of God, said, I exceedingly fear and quake. God designed that every blast of the trumpet blown by his people, whether for joy or for sorrow, for worship or for war, should be a memorial or reminder of the power of God to comfort, sustain, and protect his people. That they may be to you, he said, for a memorial before your God. I am the Lord your God. Every child of God, having full faith in the promises, who went forward and blew the trumpets in obedience to God's command, beheld the deliverance of the Lord, whether confronted by obstacles as high as the walls of Jericho, or by enemies as numerous as the hosts of Midian. While the sound of the trumpet was often heard by the children of Israel, yet there was one day in each year especially set aside for the purpose of the blowing of the trumpets. Of this day the Lord said, In the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, ye shall have a holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work. It is a day of blowing the trumpets unto you. Each month of the year was ushered in with the sound of the trumpet, and 11 sacrifices were offered. But on the 1st day of the 7th month, in addition to the 11 offerings slain the 1st of each month, 10 other offerings were offered. The day was kept as a ceremonial or annual Sabbath, and was one of the 7 days of holy convocation connected with the annual feasts. This Feast of Trumpets was a memorial. Some have thought it to be a memorial of the creation of the world, as it was celebrated at the year's end, or revolution of the year, and might have been a memorial of the time when all the sons of God shouted for joy at the creation of the world. Dr. William Smith says, the Feast of Trumpets came to be regarded as the anniversary of the birthday of the world. It is evident that, like the Passover, The Feast of Trumpets was both commemorative and typical. It came 10 days before the Day of Atonement, the type of the great investigative judgment, which opened in 1844, at the end of the long prophetic period of the 2300 years of Daniel chapter 8, verse 14. In the type, the trumpets were blown throughout Israel, warning all of the near approach of the solemn Day of Atonement. In the antitype, we should expect some worldwide message to be given in trumpet tones, announcing the time near when the great antitypical Day of Atonement, the investigative judgment, would convene in the heavens. Beginning with the years 1843 to 34 and extending down to 1844, such a message was given to the world in trumpet tones, announcing the hour of his judgment is come. William Miller and others, in their study of the declaration in Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, "Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed," found that this long prophetic period would end in 1844. They failed to connect this text with the ancient typical sanctuary, but applied the term sanctuary to this earth, and taught that in 1844 Christ would come to the earth and judge the people. William Miller was joined by hundreds of other ministers in America who proclaimed this message with great power. Edward Irving, with many other consecrated men, preached the same in England, while Joseph Wolf and others heralded it in Asia and other portions of the world. During the 10 years preceding the 10th day of the 7th month, Jewish time, in 1844, every civilized nation on the earth heard in trumpet tones the announcement of the message of Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 and 7. The hour of his judgment is come. This message was due at this period of the world's history. Paul in his day preached of a judgment to come, but the burden of the message given during these years was, the hour of his judgment is come. The fact that the men who proclaimed this message misunderstood the full import of it did not prevent their fulfilling the antitype of the ancient type. When the followers of Christ cried before him, "Blessed be the King that cometh in the name of the Lord," and spread palm branches in the way, believing that Jesus was entering Jerusalem to take the earthly kingdom, they fulfilled the prophecy of Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. If they had known that in a few days their Lord would hang upon the accursed tree, they could not have fulfilled the prophecy, for it would have been impossible for them to rejoice greatly. In like manner, the message due to the world between 1834 and 1844 could never have been given with the power and joyfulness demanded to fulfill the antitype, if those giving it had understood that the Savior, instead of coming to this earth, was to enter the most holy apartment of the heavenly sanctuary and begin the work of the investigative judgment. God hid from their eyes the fact that there were 2 other messages to be given to the world before the Lord should come to the earth in power and glory, that he could not come until they had fulfilled the antitype. Then, to comfort them in their disappointment, he allowed them by faith to look within the heavenly sanctuary and catch a glimpse of the work of their great high priest officiating for them. The prophet Joel evidently connected the closing work of the gospel on earth with the blowing of the trumpets, for he writes as follows, "Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand." The sound of trumpets was heard many times in the past, from the trumpet of the Lord's host upon Mount Sinai, when the whole earth shook, to the blast of the ram's horns before the walls of Jericho. The time is coming when the trumpet of the Lord will again be heard by mortals, when its notes will shake not the earth only, but also heaven. The clear notes of that trumpet will penetrate the deepest recesses of the earth, and just as anciently the trumpet summoned all Israel to appear before the Lord, so every child of God sleeping in the earth will answer the trumpet call and come forth to meet his Lord. In old ocean's caverns the clarion tones will be heard, and the sea, obedient to the call, will give up the dead that are in it. The whole earth will resound with the tread of the innumerable company of the redeemed, as the living and the resurrected saints gather to meet their Lord in answer to the welcome summons of the last trumpet call that will be given on this sin-cursed earth. Then all the discordant notes will forever cease, and the redeemed will hear the Savior say, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." In the ancient typical service, as the people of God met for worship at the beginning of each month and upon the Sabbath, in obedience to the clear notes of the silver trumpets, in like manner we can imagine that when the earth is made new, and from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, the redeemed assemble to worship before the Lord, it will be in response to the notes of the heavenly trumpets, of which those used in the ancient service were a type. The Cross and its Shadow, by Stephen N. Haskell. Narrated by Timothy Turner. Chapter 19. The Day of Atonement, or the Work in the Second Apartment. The 10th day of the 7th month was the Day of Atonement. It was regarded as more sacred than any other day in the yearly round of service. It was a ceremonial Sabbath and a fast day. The Israelite who did not afflict his soul upon that day was cut off from among the people. So sacred is the day regarded, even at the present time, that although the Jews have rejected Christ, and few have any regard for the Sabbath, yet when the 10th day of the 7th month comes, no Jew will do any business or work upon that day, however wicked he may be. There were several sacrifices offered upon the Day of Atonement. Before he entered upon the regular work of the day, the high priest offered a bullock for himself and his house. The chief service of the day was the offering of the goats. 2 goats were brought to the door of the sanctuary, where lots were cast upon them, one for the Lord, the other for the scapegoat, or Azazel. The high priest killed the Lord's goat, and then, clad in his gorgeous robes, with the breastplate of judgment bearing the names of the 12 tribes of Israel over his heart, and the sacred onyx stones, with the names of the tribes on his shoulders, he passed with the blood of the goat into the most holy place. Just as he entered within the second veil, carrying the golden censer, filled with coals of fire from the altar before the Lord, and his hands full of incense, he placed the incense upon the coals and the censer, that the cloud of fragrant incense might cover him as he passed in before the visible presence of God, as manifested between the cherubim above the mercy seat. With his fingers he sprinkled the blood upon the mercy seat, above the broken law of God. Then, going out into the first apartment, he touched the horns of the golden altar with the blood. When he had made an end of reconciling the holy place, and the tabernacle of the congregation, and the altar, he went out into the court. In type, the high priest now bore in his person all the sins of the children of Israel, which had been confessed and transferred to the sanctuary. He then laid his hands upon the head of the scapegoat, and confessed over him all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all their transgressions, in all their sins, putting them upon the head of the goat. And the goat was sent away, by the hand of a fit man, into the wilderness. The goat bore upon him all the iniquities, unto a land not inhabited, a land of separation. Going back into the tabernacle of the congregation, the high priest laid aside his gorgeous priestly robes, and put on his other garments. Then, coming again into the court, he cleansed the court from its defilement of sin. The bodies of the animals, whose blood had been taken within the sanctuary, were carried out of the camp and burned. When the sun set on the Day of Atonement, the sins were all gone into the land of separation, and nothing but ashes remained as a reminder of them. Thus was carried on the type of that heavenly work which is to decide the eternal destiny of every soul that has ever lived upon the earth. In type and shadow, the confessed sins of Israel had been transferred to the sanctuary during all the year. The cleansing of the sanctuary was the removing of those sins. It was therefore necessary that the patterns of things in the heavens should be purified with these, the blood of animals, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. Even sin is marked before the Lord in heaven. When sins are confessed and forgiven, they are covered. This was typified by their being transferred to the sanctuary, where no human eyes except those of the priest ever beheld the stains of blood of the sin offering upon the horns of the golden altar before the veil. It could not be possible that the books of heaven will always hold the records of sin, or that Christ will always bear the sins of the world. As the typical work was performed at the close of the year, so the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary will take place near the end of Christ's priestly work. The cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary necessitates an examination of the records, an investigative judgment. The earthly sanctuary was cleansed on the 10th day of the 7th month of each year. The heavenly will be cleansed once for all. This work was begun in 1844 A.D., at the end of the prophetic period of the 2,300 days. In the typical service, the Lord went into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, for he promised that his presence would be there. The high priest made special preparation for entering upon the service of the Day of Atonement. The prophet Daniel was given a view of the antitypical work in the heavenly sanctuary. He describes it thus: I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were open. The Bible was written in an oriental country, and the custom there is to cast down seats for guests. The Revised Version of the Bible renders it, I beheld till the thrones were placed. The position of the Father's throne was changed. Daniel beheld the thrones cast down or placed, their position being changed. Then the Ancient of Days, the Father, took his seat upon the throne. In other words, Daniel beheld the Father's throne changed from the first apartment of the heavenly sanctuary to the second. His attention was attracted by the great wheels, which looked like burning fire, as they moved beneath the glorious throne of the infinite God. Myriads of the heavenly host were gathered to witness the grand scene. Thousands ministered unto Jehovah as he took his seat upon the throne to judge the world. No mirror ever portrayed the features of the face as accurately as the books of heaven have portrayed the life record of each individual. All are judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. Behold the scene. The Father is seated on the throne of judgment. The angels who have been ministering spirits to those whose cases are to come in review before God stand ready to obey his commands. The books are opened, but there is something lacking yet. Daniel's attention is now attracted to the clouds of heaven. Myriads of angels bearing the Savior in before the Father in triumph. Earthly soldiers have often borne in triumph on their shoulders commanders who have led them to grand victories on fields of blood and carnage. Christ, the archangel, the commander of the hosts of heaven, has led the angels in many a battle. They fought under him when the archenemy of all righteousness was cast out of heaven. They beheld their commander die an ignominious death to redeem the lost race. They have sped quickly at his command to save many a soul from being overcome by Satan. The time has now come when Christ is to receive his kingdom and claim his subjects, and the angels love to bear their mighty commander in triumph before the judgment seat, where as the books reveal one life record after another, Christ confesses the name of every overcomer before the Father and before the innumerable company of angels. God's throne is a movable structure. As in the type, his visible presence was manifested in the outer apartment of the earthly sanctuary, so in heaven the throne of God was in the first apartment, when Christ ascended and sat at the right hand of his Father. But Daniel saw not only the Father and Christ change their position, but the position of the thrones also was changed. When the judgment was set and the books were opened, type had met antitype. The high priest in the heavenly sanctuary entered the most holy place, and as in the type, God promised to meet the high priest in the most holy, so the Father passed into the Holy of Holies before the high priest, and was there when the angels bore Christ triumphantly in before him. The earthly high priest bore the names of Israel on his person as he entered the most holy place, but lest some fainting soul might fear he would be forgotten, our high priest sends down the words, "Can a woman forget her sucking child, that she should not have compassion on the son of her womb? Yea, they may forget, yet will I not forget thee." And then, as if to make assurance doubly sure, he lifts his hands, bearing the print of the cruel nails, and says, "Behold, look, I have graven thee upon the palms of my hands. Thy walls are continually before me." The earthly high priest presented blood to atone for the sins of the people. Our high priest pleads his own blood. "Father, my blood, my blood, my blood." The earthly high priest carried the censer with the fragrant incense. Christ presents the fragrant righteousness of his own character, which he imputes to everyone whose sins are all confessed and covered with his blood, when their names come up in review, before the great judge. In the earthly sanctuary, the high priest paused in the first apartment to touch the horns of the golden altar and cleanse it from all sins that had been transferred to it. For while the services of the Day of Atonement were going forward, if one remembered unconfessed sins, he could still bring his sin offering and be forgiven. So, while our high priest officiates before the Father in the investigative judgment, anyone who realizes he is a sinner can come confessing his sins and be forgiven through the merits of Christ, the great sin-bearer. Our high priest, when his work is finished in the inner apartment of the heavenly sanctuary, will tarry a moment in the outer apartment, that the sins which have been confessed while he was in the most holy place may be taken, together with the sins of the righteous of all ages, and carried forth without the sanctuary. While Jesus pleads as our high priest, there is hope for every repentant sinner. But when he at last comes forth from the sanctuary, mercy's door will be forever closed. There will be no intercessor then. In the type, when the high priest came out of the sanctuary, he had made an end of reconciling. When our high priest comes forth from the sanctuary, he will proclaim, "He that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he which is filthy, let him be filthy still, and he that is righteous, let him be righteous still, and he that is holy, let him be holy still." Every case is decided for eternity. Probation is forever ended. All who wait until that time, hoping to be saved, will find no one to plead their case before the Father. They will be eternally lost. In the type, after the high priest had finished the work within the sanctuary on the Day of Atonement, he came forth bearing the sins of all Israel, and placed them upon the head of the scapegoat. The scapegoat had no part in reconciling the people to God. The work of reconciling was all ended when the scapegoat was brought forward to act his part in the service. The only work of the scapegoat is to act as a vehicle to carry the sins of the righteous into the land of separation. The term scapegoat has become a synonym of an evil one. Azazel, the Hebrew rendering of scapegoat, is a proper name and is understood to represent the devil. When our high priest has finished his work in the heavenly sanctuary, he will place all the sins of the righteous, which he has borne thus far, upon the head of Satan, the instigator of sin. Satan will then be left upon the desolate earth, a land not inhabited, for 1,000 years, at the end of which time he will be burned to ashes in the fires of the last day. In the type, after the high priest had placed the sins of Israel upon the head of the scapegoat, he left the robes worn while officiating as high priest in the sanctuary, and put on other garments, and began a work in the court. He had the bodies of the animals whose blood had been carried into the sanctuary taken without the camp and burned. At the close of the day, ashes were the only thing to be seen of the sin offerings. Our high priest lays aside his priestly garments, and clad as King of Kings, he rides forth as a mighty conqueror to gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. Christ comes to set in order the antitypical court, this earth, and when the great antitypical day of atonement ends, nothing will remain that will in any way be a reminder of sin, except the ashes under the feet of the righteous. The word atonement means at-one-ment, and when Christ pronounces the decree which determines the eternal destiny of every soul, he and the subjects of his kingdom are at-one-ment. Sin will never again separate Christ from his people. But the territory of his kingdom is still cursed by sin. So the at-one-ment of Christ and his kingdom will not be complete in every sense of the term until from the fires of the last day there comes forth a new earth with every mark of the curse removed. Then not only the subjects of Christ's kingdom, but the entire earth will be at one-ment with Christ and the Father. Sin will never again arise to mar the earth, but it will be the home of the redeemed forever.